What exactly is a memory, physically? Is it a series of chemicals one creates over time and stores in the brain? What exactly is being stored in your brain once you make a memory? Physically, a memory is a specific pattern of neurons firing in the brain. Recalling that memory means making those neurons fire in the same pattern again, essentially reconstructing the memory. Man, that's crazy to think how many variations of patterns there are in someone's brain. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. The neurons on the hippocampus are connected to a lot of other places in the brain associated with specific concepts. The memory itself isn't like a self-contained thing, the memory is the hippocampus triggering all the associations required to make that play-by-play experience in your head. The same places in your brain that has interpreted visual signals as a human face will be active when you remember that face. Neurons are all about connections and the brain is a big mess of associations. Neurons that fire together wire together, as the saying goes. Jumping off the above comment. Your memories are not like computer files, they are more like a series of clues. Your five senses and emotions factor into memories. A theory about sleep and dreams is that, among other things, it's memory consolidation. Your brain organizes memories while you sleep. One correlation is that people who learn new things in a classroom or formal training report lots of dreams when they sleep. Some memories fade or become disjointed because they are not used. That person from your teen years that interacted with a lot, is now the dude with the shirt because the memories weren't used, or weren't used that much. You can recover some of that, so when the dude with the shirt sends you a FB request, your brain will try to get as much as it can, but will fill in the blanks with new information. The key takeaway is that memory isn't like a DVD or a photograph, it's a living thing that can be replenished or die based on how it's used. Was in college about 6 years after graduating high school. Was sitting around the lunch table with a bunch of students in my program and we were talking about our past. I turned to the girl next to me and asked her where she went to high school. She dropped her jaw and became agitated, saying we went to the same school and played softball together 1 year. I honestly did not remember that until she mentioned it. I played 7 different sports and was active in a bunch of volunteer programs and other after-school clubs. Was studying in my 3rd degree program by then. Had no mutual friends that had brought her up since that year we played together and just forgot about her. She never forgave me for that and hasn't spoken to me since. Felt terrible for years until reading your comment. Still feel bad, but less so? If I was a 5-year-old I would lose you at the first few words. LI5 means friendly, simplified and layperson accessible explanations, not responses aimed at literal 5-year-olds. Yeah. Why is he calling it a hippocampus? Isn't it a rhinoceros university by now? I'm still waiting to find a first grader with mutually exclusive in their vocab. Ike 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion connections by rough estimate. Rough estimate here means completely making up numbers. Rough estimate. I've got like 40 solid memories. 41 now. Look at Mr. Fancy double digits here. La-di-da, I say a you. Exactly what boggles my mind about saving data on a hard drive. Little electronic zaps just remembering themselves. Like what? It's actually much more simple than you seem to think it is. It's all just ones and zeros stored in a physical form. You shouldn't be impressed by the fact that electricity can be used to write information, you instead should be impressed by just how much information we can store onto modern hard drives. That's the really impressive part, emo. Nah, the storage itself is much more interesting to me. It doesn't make sense that electricity can hold memories. But it's not memories. It's just a massive amount of zeros and ones. Literally all a computer does is turn tiny switches on and off. It's that the switches are so tiny they fit like 512 billion of them in a thumb drive. That's amazing. With enough on/offs you can express literally anything. Yes, but I'm talking about how it remembers all of those decisions it's made. How? I'm gonna talk about standard spinning disk 7200 revolutions per minute hard drives, commonly referred to as HDD, to explain this rather than solid-state drives, also called SSD, since they are a bit simpler to understand. Basically, a hard drive is comprised of a spinning disk, a tiny mechanical arm, and some very smart use of magnetization. The disk spins and the computer controls the mechanical arm to write data onto the disk. This means the mechanical arm shoots little zaps of electricity at the disk as it's spinning by in order to magnetize very tiny portions of the disk. There is a physical phenomena happening, the magnetization of microscopic nails on the disk, so it's not the disk magically remembering what's written on it, the computer is physically manipulating the electromagnetic field of tiny spots on the disk. Now imagine you have a wall with 4 light bulbs. Each of these lights can be either on, lit up, or off, unlit. Since there are 4 lights, there are 16 total combinations ranging from all off to all on. We can assign number values to each of these positions. 0 will be all off, 1 would off on, 2 would be off on, 3 would be off on, and so on until you get to 15 or on. This is the basic premise of assigning information to binary data. Going back to the hard drive example, the magnetized nails act as those light bulbs. They are polarized to either north or south position. This is the direction of the magnetic field, either up or down in relation to the disk. Well, just like with the lights, we could say down means a 0 and up means a 1. When your computer writes to a hard drive, it is taking the information you and I want to store, in its binary form, because that's what computers use for all information, because a computer is basically just a very well planned set of switches, and manipulating the magnetic field on the HDD to store that information. Then when you need to pull it up again, the disk spins and the computer uses the same mechanical arm to read those north or south magnetic fields and copies down all of the ones and zeros of your data. Thinking about the light bulbs is easy enough because it's of comprehensible size and scale that it's easy enough to grasp, but computers do this extremely quickly and on a massive scale. Instead of a wall with 4 lights, your computer is more like a massive warehouse with trillions of lights, and it knows how to interpret every single distinct pattern that can be made with each of those trillion lights being either on or off. For example, a modern HDD may store 1 terabyte, which is 8 trillion lights to store different patterns of information. However, I think your main gripe with it is not knowing how the data actually stays there, but once the magnetic field is written onto the disk, it stays there for quite a long period of time before decaying enough to become incomprehensible for the computer to read. That's fancy tech that takes more explaining. TL, Doctor, computers operate in binary, zeros and ones only. Information is stored on a hard drive by manipulating electromagnetic fields, direction equals 0 or 1. A computer reads those electromagnetic fields to copy the data that's stored. Computer programming allows us to convert binary data into readable human information, aka the stuff we see on the screen. Thank you. Very well written. I definitely understand binary. It's how the data was coded and decoded that I didn't understand. Magnets. That's a good answer. Fucking magnets, man. Cheers. So it's making decisions now. You're attributing consciousness to a bunch of chips. It doesn't make decisions, and I don't even know how to begin explaining why. Computers can only do what humans tell them to. Whether humans make decisions is the real question. Stitch Grimley has apparently never heard that it doesn't stop being magic just because you know how it's done. Decisions aren't made by the drive. Data is written and stored. You instruct data to write a certain combination of zeros and ones. Then it stays that way until you send it more instructions. It's not memories, It's like the computer is writing down information onto a piece of paper, and then just reading it back. Not very impressive, but imagine if you could write an entire book onto one page and read it back in a minute. That'd be bloody impressive, and that's in essence what a computer is doing. That's the brain too though. It's a little different with the brain. I think of it like this. With a computer, if you don't store anything, when you provide the same input, you get the same output. At these two numbers, you anyways get the same answer with the same numbers. When you store stuff, if the storage is in the same state, the same inputs into a function that consults the storage always gives the same output. If the database or memory has Abraham Lincoln and you send an input in specifying lookup Lincoln, you get back that stored stuff about Lincoln. With brains it's different. There's no hard line between data and algorithm. When you send inputs into a function in a brain, what it does depends not just in those inputs but in all previous inputs too. And the effect of sending that one more input through alters things a bit as well, so it changes for the next time. So there's this organic mashing up of data storage and code that writes itself based only on what works well enough versus what doesn't. There's a difference though. Consider a book that just has the information stored directly as pages, hard drive stores 01 asset addresses, and consider a huge network of nodes, where turning on some nodes produces the same information by turning on other nodes in a response, the brain. One is a straightforward storage of data, and the other is spontaneous formation of connections into a network that somehow produces the same end result, without directly encoding the information. I really don't think that is so mind-boggling. Think of it as tiny rechargeable batteries. If they are empty they are a 0 and if they are charged it is a 1. So just add a bunch of them together and it is basically how computer storage works. The concept is pretty straightforward and simple emo. It is still crazy just how many there are and how fast that information can be processed, but the concept is very basic. The execution is impressive. It's crazy to think how many ways a deck of cards can be shuffled. The firing patterns of a brain is next level beyond that. Even language is just pattern recognition and memory. Will I forget things that happened in my early 20s soon? I'm kind of feeling like I am. I'm 35. Would it be, theoretically, possible to make the neurons fire in such a way to create memories that someone never had? I think the point is that that's basically always what it is. You can never truly perfectly recall a memory. Every time you experience it, it's a unique chemical pattern that evolves and then forms new memories. How, and in what configuration, that's actually stored, I don't really know, however. Does this explain déjà vu? I really don't know, but I would be weary because this sounds like it would be true, which makes it a prime candidate for broscience. I think déjà vu is explained by storing the memory of the present as if it occurred in the past. You think you experienced the present before, but that is only because of an incorrect timestamp. This is more or less accurate. It's basically a routing error that files your short-term memory away as a long-term memory. So you remember the moment you were in as if you've been there before. Déjà vu is a phenomenon where you think you experienced something before, but actually haven't. Wonder if it's because we've had a similar enough firing of those neurological patterns for us to think that it's the same memory? I think it's just fatigue. I only ever get déjà vu when I haven't slept enough. Yeah, I've read too that when you remember something, you're not actually remembering that event, you're remembering the last time you remembered that event, which is weird. Some people do get memories of events that never happened. Every time you dream. I start dreaming the moment I doze off, like when I'm still slightly conscious, and often snap back awake. The instant I start dreaming I have an entire lifetime of memories that aren't real. All the conversations and events of the dream are already referenced and completely familiar until I wake up and realize none of it was. It's pretty incredible. Almost like you're genuinely dipping into another reality that carries on. The only difference is you don't wake up there, you just drop in mid doing stuff. Usually I'm talking to someone about events that never happened but which I can seamlessly recollect within the dream. I have experienced this myself. I came to America and my family here started telling me stories of their experiences in America. About a year or two later I would tell the same stories to my family as if the memories were my own, and they'd tell me you weren't even here yet. And I realized that I somehow made their stories into my own memories. Yes, that's why using hypnotism and other methods to retrieve lost or repressed memories is so controversial. It's actually very easy to create false memories, which has even led to people thinking they were sexually abused by a parent when that never actually happened. It can ruin families and lives. Also, every time you recall a memory, it can be changed a tiny bit. Your brain is basically playing a game of telephone with itself and the original memory can get distorted over time. That's also why witness testimony is also becoming less trusted by the legal system. Memories are often faulty. Imagination. 100% yes. That's why eyewitness testimony is very rarely accepted in court anymore. And there are studies done where they create false memories due to stimulation of the brain in certain ways. Have you ever had a scene from a movie clear in your mind, only to watch it again and realize it's slightly different? Heck, this happens on a mass scale sometimes, which lead to people thinking they must have been transported from a similar dimension with that one difference. That's called imagination. As far as we know. Honestly, we can't really say exactly what a memory is, but we do observe the same neurons firing in succession when someone is recalling the same memory. And so we may be able to identify parts of the brain that hold certain kinds of memories, or affinity for certain objects. There is a lot of chemicals, neurotransmitters, that are a part of this process as well. This answer is too simplified, and in the next decade the answer to this question is highly likely to change as more discoveries are made. This is the first time I'm seeing the physiology of memories being explained. Sites? My understanding is that, like consciousness, scientists cannot yet pinpoint exactly where memories are stored. They have a general region of the brain, sure. They also, based on my personal and possibly incorrect understanding, can explain how memory works, in part because of how much it's tied into our emotional system. I'd love to see the source where they have identified this as the location of our memories. Isn't it consensus that the human brain is just a fancy neural network? The weights and connections in a neural network can be used as storage. I believe this is the belief, and they can be used for storage doesn't mean we have scientific evidence that this is exactly what's happening. It would seem that if we know where memory is, then a whole lot of psychological issues could be handled by targeting / removing / dulling the memory of traumatic events. I'm not contesting we know general region of the brain, though, to be fair, what I've read indicates that there are different types of memories, and different types of memories are stored in different places. For example, long-term memory might start in the hippocampus but ultimately be stored in the cerebral cortex. None of this really helps us know what a memory is, physically, if there are both different forms of it and multiple locations of it. Even if we knew precisely how the human brain works, I'm not sure it would help us much. We know all the details of artificial neural networks with perfect accuracy, and yet it's, as far as I know, extremely difficult to understand / predict an already trained network or alter it deliberately in a certain way. I'm curious as to what part of a memory corresponds to one neuron, and specifically what that neuron is doing differently than the other neurons in the sequence. How many neutrons does our brain have? But how do you know to recreate that pattern of neurons again? Say you experience something, neurons fire, Cool. Then you move on with your day and your neurons are doing other stuff. So to remember stuff earlier in the day, those patterns of neurons from earlier fire off again. But where or how was that pattern stored and recalled? I see this answer to the question all the time, but it never feels like a definitive answer that makes any real sense. To be fair, it's a very complicated subject that's still very much under active research. The fact that no one can give a complete and definitive answer is because we don't have one yet. Or are possibly the neurons firing up just because we think about the memory? How can we be sure that's the end of the line, so to speak? They are like binary. Or something like that? I can't seem to comprehend how those paths of chemical energy coiled form a memory. Not binary, but rather more or less strong along a spectrum, like when you can remember something very well, or have to struggle to remember it. The more connections or associations you have to a particular memory, the easier it is to bring it up, because many more different things you know can reach and activate it. It's what the energy of the chemicals does that forms a memory. As signals move through synapses repeatedly, the structures in those synapses can be changed, and in being changed they become weighted, that is, they allow new incoming signals to have more of a firing effect on the neuron. It's kind of like writing something down, and then going back another time and writing back over one or two words to make them stand out more to your eye when you might reread them again. Memories are stored as links between neurons in your brain. Neurons are brain cells that send signals to other neurons. The number of neurons in your brain mostly stays the same over your life. But, the links between them is what changes when we learn or remember things. The exact nature of how a memory gets encoded into links between neurons isn't well understood though. Ah, I see. I wonder if we're going to be able to understand the links in our lifetime. So, if someone gets amnesia, that would mean something happened to the links of the neurons specifically. FYI, amnesia like you'd see in movies where a person just suddenly forgets big of their life and who they are is incredibly rare, although I've seen a case in the ER, and almost always psychological. Far more common is amnesia that involves a period of time where you can't form any new memories, usually due to drug intoxication, alcohol, head trauma, stroke, etc. Also, Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia cause a slow loss of past memories, ability to form new memories, and general functions of the mind. Good list, also sleep deprivation and extended stress, if I may add. I suspect one of the key connections between depression and memory loss involves head injury in some cases. What's interesting is that memory is really a range of different things. Remembering how to ride a bike is different from remembering what you had yesterday. And these memories are physically localized to different parts of the brain. Memory is very complex, and what we perceive as memory is probably many different processes in our brains occurring simultaneously. Nobody knows yes, because in experiments where doctors cut different pieces from the brain, the patient don't lose his memories. And hence the theory of the fractal brain. No, it's not the chemicals themselves but the neuron network, which is the links formed between different brain nerve cells which are connected to all the surrounding neurons by synapses. The neuron network is electrochemical in nature. It's not only the precise chemicals but the exact flow of electrons between them. It's not an easy concept to grasp, but if you think of how data is stored in a book or on a hard drive, nope, it's the exact opposite of that. It's not orderly. Think about a network of telephone poles. If you have 10 poles, neurons, in a circle around each other, you take each pole and run telephone cables, synapses, from that pole to every other pole. So you have 9 plus 8 plus 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 equals 45 connections. Add another pole and form another 10 connections and keep going up to 1,000,000 poles. Now you'll have n plus 1 divided by 2 equals 500,500,000. 500 trillion connections. A memory will be stored in a group of connections built up from individual synaptic connections. Now comes what will blow your mind: these aren't permanent. When you recall a memory, you are overwriting the connections that are there. Those childhood memories of yours aren't childhood memories, they're memories of you remembering memories of you remembering memories of you remembering memories of what your brain reprocessed during your sleep from your short-term memories on the day. FYI, the answer is nobody knows. Some interesting ideas being kicked around here, but we don't really know. In a previous Eli 5, I explained that memory isn't a filing cabinet, it's a web. This web is made of neurons, which communicate electrochemically. Place two of your fingers, facing each other, almost touching but not. These are the neurons in our example. Picture electricity running up the left finger to the nail. When it gets to the nail, it releases chemicals, neurotransmitters, which are received by the right finger, triggering it to pass along the electrical signal and so on. Physically, neurons can be something like 4 to 100 micrometers long. A micron is the same as a micrometer, no idea why there's two terms for it. From Wiki, in American English, micron is used to distinguish a measurement from a device that's called a micrometer, which measures lengths, in micrometers. When speaking of a measurement, one might say micrometer, or micrometer, but for the device, it's more like micrometer, again to distinguish the two identically spelled words. I say micrometer for the device and micrometer for the measurement. Imagine our brain is a field of tall grass. And you want to get from point A to point B, say, you want to memorize a piece of poetry. Every time you recite the poem, you're crossing the field from point A to point B. It'd be hard at first, since the grass is tall and you have to force your way through it. But the more you read the poem, the more you cross that hypothetical grass field, the more those tall grass gave way, slowly forming a path and you can easily navigate. Eventually the grass will wither away and forms a straight dirt path then you can quickly walk through. So in the most basic sense, your brains, the grass field, adapt to what you're doing, forming new connections, our dirt path, of neurons, making subsequent action much quicker every time you repeat it. Though there's bunch of different types of memory, a short-term memory, a long-term memory. Think of it as a RAM and a HDD respectively on your brain. Long-term memory is also further differentiated between its use, etc.